Ulysses by James Joyce. Chapter 1, Part 1. Stately, plump Buck Mulligan came from the stairhead, bearing a bowl of lather on which a mirror and a razor lay crossed. A yellow dressing gown, engirdled, was sustained gently behind him on the mild morning air. He held the bowl aloft and intoned, "Introibo ad altare Dei." Halted, he peered down the dark winding stairs and called out coarsely, "Come up, Kinch. Come up, you fearful Jesuit." Solemnly he came forward and mounted the round gun rest. He faced about and blessed gravely thrice the tower, the surrounding land and the awakened mountains. Then, catching sight of Stephen Dedalus, he bent towards him and made rapid crosses in the air, gurgling in his throat and shaking his head. Stephen Dedalus, displeased and sleepy, leaned his arms on the top of the staircase and looked coldly at the shaking, gurgling face that blessed him, equine in its length, and at the light and thin shirt hair, grained and hued like pale oak. Buck Mulligan peeped an instant under the mirror and then covered the bowl smartly. "Back to barracks," he said sternly. He added in a preacher's tone, "For this, oh dearly beloved, is the genuine Christine, body and soul and blood and ounce." "Slow music, please. Shut your eyes, gents. One moment. A little trouble about those wild corpuscles. Silence, all." He peered sideways up and gave a long slow whistle of cold, then paused a while in rapt attention, his even white teeth glistening here and there with gold points. "Chrysostomos." Two strong shrill whistles answered through the calm. "Thanks, old chap," he cried briskly. "That will do nicely. Switch off the current, will you?" He skipped off the gun rest and looked gravely at his watcher, gathering about his legs the loose folds of his gown. The plump shadowed face and sullen oval jowl recalled a prelate, patron of arts in the Middle Ages. A pleasant smile broke quietly over his lips. "The mockery of it," he said gaily. "Your absurd name, an ancient Greek." He pointed his finger in friendly jest and went over to the parapet, laughing to himself. Stephen Dedalus stepped up, followed him wearily halfway and sat down on the edge of the gun rest, watching him still as he propped his mirror on the parapet, dipped the brush in the bowl and lathered cheeks and neck. Buck Mulligan's gay voice went on. "My name is absurd too, Malachi Mulligan, two dactyls. But it has a Hellenic ring, hasn't it? Tripping and sunny like the Buck himself. We must go to Athens. Will you come if I can get the aunt to fork out 20 quid? He laid the brush aside and, laughing with delight, cried, "Will he come?" The judge and Jesuit. Ceasing, he began to shave with care. "Tell me, Mulligan," Stephen said quietly. "Yes, my love. How long is Haynes going to stay in this tower?" Buck Mulligan showed a shaven cheek over his right shoulder. "God, isn't he dreadful?" he said frankly. "A ponderous accent. He thinks you're not a gentleman. God, these bloody English. Bursting with money and indigestion. Because he comes from Oxford. You know, Dedalus, you have the real Oxford manner. He can't make you out. Oh, my name for you is the best, Kinch, the knife blade." He shaved warily over his chin. "He was raving all night about a Black Panther," Stephen said. "Where's his gun case?" "The woeful lunatic," Mulligan said. "Were you in a funk?" "I was," Stephen said with energy and growing fear. "Out here in the dark with a man I don't know raving and moaning to himself about shooting a Black Panther. You save men from drowning. I'm not a hero, however. If he stays on here, I am off. Buck Mulligan frowned at the leather on his razor blade. He hopped down from his perch and began to search his trouser pockets hastily. "Scudder!" he cried thickly. He came over to the gun rest and, thrusting a hand into Stephen's upper pocket, said, "Lend this alone of your nose rag to wipe my razor." Stephen suffered him to pull out and hold upon show by its corner a dirty crumpled handkerchief. Buck Mulligan wiped the razor blade neatly. Then, gazing over the handkerchief, he said, "The bard's nose rag. A new art color for our Irish poets, snow green. You can almost taste it, can't you?" He mounted to the parapet again and gazed out over Dublin Bay, his fair opal hair stirring slightly. "God," he said quietly. "Isn't the sea what Algyp calls it, the grey sweet mother? The snot green sea. The scrotum titling sea. Epioino proponton. Ah, Daedalus, the Greeks. I must teach ye. You must read them in the original. Thalada. Thalada. She is our great sweet mother. Come and look." Stephen stood up and went over to the parapet. Leaning on the, he looked down the water and on the mail boat clearing the harbor mouth of Kingstown. "Our mighty mother," Buck Mulligan said. He turned abruptly his gray searching eyes from the sea to Stephen's face. "The Anne thinks you killed your mother," he said. "That's why she won't let me have anything to do with you." "Someone killed her," Stephen said gloomily. "You could have knelt down, damn it, Kinch, when your dying mother asked you," Buck Mulligan said. "I'm Hyperborean as much as you. But to think of your mother begging you with her last breath to kneel down and pray for her. And you refused. There's something sinister in you." He broke off and lathered again lightly his farther cheek. A tolerant smile curled his lips. "But a lovely mummer," he murmured to himself. "Kinch, the loveliest mummer of them all." He shaved evenly and with care, and silence, seriously. Stephen, an elbow rested on the jagged granite, leaned his palm against his brow and gazed at the fraying edge of his shiny black coat sleeve. Pain, that was not yet the pain of love, fretted his heart. Silently, in a dream she had come to him after her death, her wasted body within its loose brown grave clothes giving off an odor of wax and rosewood, her breath, that had bent upon him, mute, reproachful, a faint odor of wetted ashes. Across the threadbare cuff edge he saw the sea held as a great sweet mother by the well-fed voice beside him. The ring of bay and skyline held a dull green mass of liquid. The bowl of white china had stood beside her deathbed holding the green sluggish bile which she had torn up from her rotting liver by fits of loud groaning vomiting. Buck Mulligan wiped again his razor blade. "Ah, poor dog's body," he said in a kind voice. "I must give you a shirt and a few nose rags. How are the second-hand breeks?" "They fit well enough," Stephen answered. Buck Mulligan attacked the hollow beneath his underlip. "The mockery of it," he said contentedly. "Second leg they should be. God knows what poxy bowsy left them off. I have a lovely pair with the hair striped, gray. You look spiffing in them. I'm not joking, Kinch. You look damn well when you're dressed." "Thanks," Stephen said. "I can't wear them if they are gray." He can't wear them, Buck Mulligan told his face in the mirror. Etiquette is etiquette. He kills his mother but he can't wear gray trousers. He folded his razor neatly and with stroking palps of fingers felt the smooth skin. Stephen turned his gaze from the sea into the plump face with its smoke-blue mobile eyes. "That fellow I was with in the ship last night," said Buck Mulligan, "says you have GPI. He's up in Dottyville with Conley Norman. General paralysis of the insane." He swept the mirror a half-circle in the air to flash the tidings abroad in sunlight now radiant on the sea. His curling shaven lips laughed in the edges of his white glittering teeth. Laughter seized all his strong well-knit trunk. "Look at yourself," he said, "you dreadful bard." Stephen bent forward and peered at the mirror held out to him, cleft by a crooked crack. Hair on end. As he and others see me. Who chose this face for me? This dog's batted red vermin. It asks me to. I pinched it out of the Scabby's room, Buck Mulligan said. It is all right. The Ann always keeps plain-looking servants for Malachi. Let him not into temptation. And her name is Ursula. Laughing again, he brought the mirror away from Stephen's peering eyes. The rage of Caliban at not seeing his face in a mirror, he said. If Wild were only alive to see you. Drawing back and pointing, Stephen said with bitterness, it is a symbol of Irish art. The cracked looking glass of a servant. Buck Mulligan suddenly linked his arm on Stephen's and walked with him round the tower, his razor and mirror clacking in the pocket where he had thrust them. It's not fair to tease you like that, Kinch, is it? He said kindly. God knows you have more spirit than any of them. Parried again. He fears the lancet of my art as I fear that of his. The cold steel pen. Cracked-looking glass of a servant. Tell that to the Oxy chap downstairs and touch him for a guinea. He's stinking with money and thinks you're not a gentleman. His old fellow made his tin by selling jalap to Zulus or some bloody swindle or other. God, Kinch, if you and I could only work together we might do something for the island. Hellenes it. Cranley's arm. His arm. And to think of your having to beg from these swine. I'm the only one that knows what you are. Why don't you trust me more? What have you up your nose against me? Is it Haynes? If he makes any noise here I'll bring down Seymour and we'll give him a ragging worse than they gave Clive Kempthorpe. Young shouts of moneyed voices in Clive Kempthorpe's rooms. Paula faces, they hold their ribs with laughter, one clasping another. Oh, I shall expire. Break the news to her gently, Aubrey. I shall die. The slit ribbons of his shirt whipping the air he hops and hobbles round the table, with trousers down at heels, chased by aids of Magdalen with the tailor's shears. A scared calf's face gilded with marmalade. I don't want to be debagged. Don't you play the giddy ox with me. Shouts from the open window startling evening in the quadrangle. A deaf gardener, a prone, masked with Matthew Arnold's face, pushes his mower on the sunbalawn watching narrowly the dancing motes of Grashams. To ourselves. New paganism. Unfalos. Let him stay, Stephen said. There's nothing wrong with him except at night. Then what is it? Buck Mulligan asked impatiently. Cough it up. I'm quite frank with you. What have you against me now? They halted, looking towards the blunt cape of Bray Head that lay on the water like the snout of a sleeping whale. Stephen freed his arm quietly. Do you wish me to tell you? He asked. Yes, what is it? Buck Mulligan answered. I don't remember anything. He looked in Stephen's face as he spoke. A light wind passed his brow, fanning softly his fair uncombed hair and stirring silver points of anxiety in his eyes. Stephen, depressed by his own voice, said, "Do you remember the first day I went to your house after my mother's death?" Buck Mulligan frowned quickly and said, "What? Where? I can't remember anything. I remember only ideas and sensations." "Why? What happened in the name of God?" "You were making tea," Stephen said, and went across the landing to get more hot water. "Your mother and some visitor came out of the drawing room. She asked you who was in your room." "Yes," Buck Mulligan said. "What did I say?" "I forget." "You said," Stephen answered, "Oh, it's only Ulysses whose mother's beastly dead." A flush which made him seem younger and more engaging rose to Buck Mulligan's cheek. "Did I say that?" he asked. "Well, what harm is that?" He shook his constraint from him nervously. "And what is death?" he asked, "your mother's or yours or my own?" "You saw only your mother die." "I see them pop off every day in the Mater and Richmond and cut up into tripes in the dissecting room. It's a beastly thing and nothing else. It simply doesn't matter. You wouldn't kneel down to pray for your mother on her deathbed when she asked you." "Why?" "Because you have the cursed Jesuit strain in you, only it's injected the wrong way. To me it's all a mockery and beastly. Her cerebral lobes are not functioning. She calls the doctor Sir Peter Tiasl and picks buttercups off the quilt. Humor her till it's over. You crossed her last wish in death and yet you sulk with me because I don't whinge like some hired mute from the lutes. Absurd. I suppose I did say it. I didn't mean to offend the memory of your mother." He had spoken himself a new boldness. Stephen, shielding the gaping wounds which the words had left in his heart, said very coldly, "I am not thinking of the offense to my mother." "Of what then?" Buck Mulligan asked. "Of the offense to me," Stephen answered. Buck Mulligan swung round on his heel. "Oh, an impossible person?" he exclaimed. He walked off quickly round the parapet. Stephen stood at his post, gazing over the calm sea towards the headland. Sea and headland now grew dim. Pulses were beating in his eyes, veiling their sight, and he felt the fever of his cheeks. A voice within the tower called loudly, "Are you up there, Mulligan?" "I'm coming," Buck Mulligan answered. He turned towards Stephen and said, "Look at the sea. What does it care about offenses? Chuck Loyola, Kinch, and come on down. The Sassanite wants his morning rushers." His head halted again for a moment at the top of the staircase, level with the roof. "Don't single quote team mope over it all day," he said. "I'm inconsequent. Give up the moody brooding." His head vanished, but the drone of his descending voice boomed out of the stairhead, and no more turn aside and brood upon love's bitter mystery. For Fergus rules the brazen cars. Wood shadows floated silently by through the morning peace from the stairhead seaward where he gazed. Inshore and farther out the mere and water whitened, spurned by light-shod hurrying feet. White breast of the dim sea. The twining stresses, 2 by 2. A hand plucking the harp strings, merging their twining chords. Wave white wedded words shimmering on the dim tide. A cloud began to cover the sun slowly, wholly, shadowing the bay in deeper green. It lay beneath him, a bowl of bitter waters. Fergus' song, I sang it alone in the house, holding down the long dark chords. Her door was open, she wanted to hear my music. Silent with awe and pity, I went to her bedside. She was crying in her wretched bed. For those words, Stephen, love's bitter mystery. Where now? Her secrets, all feather fans, tasseled dance scarves, powdered with musk, a god of amber beads in her locked drawer. A bird cage hung in the sunny window of her house when she was a girl. She heard old Roy sing in the pantomime of Turco the Terrible and laughed with others when he sang, "I am the boy." That cunning joy, invisibility, phantasmal mirth, folded away, musk perfumed, and no more turned aside and brood. Folded away in the memory of nature with her toys. Memories beset his brooding brain. Her glass of water from the kitchen tap when she had approached the sacrament. A cord apple, filled with brown sugar, roasting for her at the hob on a dark autumn evening. Her shapely fingernails reddened by the blood of squash lice from the children's shirts. In a dream, silently, she had come to him, her wasted body within its loose grave clothes giving off an odor of wax and rosewood, her breath, bent over him with mute secret words, a faint odor of wetted ashes. Her glazing eyes, staring out at death, to shake and bend my soul. On me alone. The ghost candle to light her agony. Ghostly light on the tortured face. Her hoarse loud breath rattling in horror, while all prayed on their knees. Her eyes on me to strike me down. Lelia rudi lampirenti confessorum terma circumdet, ubi lampirenti virginum chorus excipit. Gal. Chiro corpses. No, mother. Let me be and let me live. Kinch ahoy! Buck Mulligan's voice sang from within the tower. It came nearer up the staircase, calling again. Stephen, still trembling at his soul's cry, heard warm running sunlight and in the air behind him friendly words. Daedalus, come down, like a good mosey. Breakfast is ready. Haynes is apologizing for waking us last night. It's all right. I'm coming, Stephen said, turning. Do, for Jesus' sake, Buck Mulligan said. For my sake and for all our sakes. His head disappeared and reappeared. I told him your symbol of Irish art. He says it's very clever. Touch him for a quid, will you? A guinea, I mean. I get paid this morning, Stephen said. The school kit. Buck Mulligan said. How much? 4 quid. Lend us one. If you want it, Stephen said. 4 shining sovereigns, Buck Mulligan cried with delight. We'll have a glorious drunk to astonish the druided druids. 4 omnipotent sovereigns. He flung up his hands and tramped down the stone stairs, singing out of tune with a Cockney accent. Oh, won't we have a merry time, drinking whiskey, beer and wine. On Coronation Day. Oh, won't we have a merry time. On Coronation Day. Warm sunshine merrying over the sea. The nickel shaving bowl shone, forgotten, on the parapet. Why should I bring it down, or leave it there all day, forgotten friendship? He went over to it, held it in his hands a while, feeling its coolness, smelling the clammy flavor of the lather in which the brush was stuck. So I carried the bolt of incense in a clogos. I am another now and yet the same. A servant too. A servant of a servant. In the gloomy domed living room of the tower, Buck Mulligan's gowned form moved briskly to and fro about the hearth, hiding and revealing its yellow glow. 2 shafts of soft daylight fell across the flag flower from the high bar bacons, and at the meeting of the rays a cloud of quail smoke and fumes of fried grease floated, turning. We'll be choked, Buck Mulligan said. Haynes, open the door, will you? Stephen laid the shaving bowl on the locker. The tall figure rose from the hammock where it had been sitting, went to the doorway and pulled open the inner doors. Have you the key? A voice asked. Daedalus has it, Buck Mulligan said. Janie Mac, I'm choked. He howled, without looking up from the fire. Kinch. It's in the lock, Stephen said, coming forward. The key scraped round harshly twice and, when the heavy door had been set ajar, welcome light and bright air entered. Haynes stood at the doorway, looking out. Stephen hauled his open valise to the table and sat down to wait. Buck Mulligan tossed the fry onto the dish beside him. Then he carried the dish and a large teapot over to the table, set them down heavily inside with a leaf. I'm melting, he said, as the candle remarked when. But, hush. Not a word more on that subject. Kinch, wake up. Bread, butter, honey. Haynes, come in. The grub is ready. Bless us, O Lord, and these thy gifts. Where's the sugar? Oh, Jay, there's no milk. Stephen fetched the loaf and the pot of honey and the butter cooler from the locker. Buck Mulligan sat down in a sudden pit. What sort of a kip is this? He said. I told her to come after it. We can drink it black, Stephen said thirstily. There's a lemon in the locker. Oh, damn you and your apprentice fads. Buck Mulligan said. I want Sandy Cove milk. Haynes came in from the doorway and said quietly, that woman is coming up with the milk. The blessings of God on you. Buck Mulligan cried, jumping up from his chair. Sit down. Pour out the tea there. The sugar's in the bag. Here, I can't go fumbling at the damned eggs. He hacked through the fry on the dish and slapped it out on 3 plates, saying, In nomen Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Haynes sat down to pour out the tea. I'm giving you 2 lumps each, he said. But, I say, Mulligan, you make strong tea, don't you? Buck Mulligan, hewing thick slices from the loaf, said in an old woman's wheedling voice, When I makes tea, his old mother Grogan said. And when I makes water. By Jove, it is tea, Haynes said. Buck Mulligan went on hewing and wheedling, so I do, Mrs. Cahill, says she. Begob, ma'am, says Mrs. Cahill, God send you don't make them into one pot. He lunged towards his messmates and turned a thick slice of bread, impaled on his knife. That's folk, he said very earnestly, for your book, Haynes. 5 lines of text and 10 pages of notes about the folk and the fish gods of Dundren. Printed by the Weird Sisters in the year of the big wind. He turned to Stephen and asked in a fine puzzled voice, lifting his brows, Can you recall, brother, is Mother Grogan's tea and water pot spoken of in the Mabinogion or is it in the Upanishads? I doubt it, said Stephen gravely. Do you now? Buck Mulligan said in the same tone. Your reasons, pray. I fancy, Stephen said as he ate, it did not exist in or out of the Mabinogion. Mother Grogan was, one imagines, a kinswoman of Mary Ann. Buck Mulligan's face smiled with delight. Charming, he said in a finical sweet voice, showing his white teeth and blinking his eyes pleasantly. Do you think she was quite charming? Then, suddenly overclouding all his features, he growled in a hoarse and rasping voice as he hewed again vigorously at the loaf, For old Mary Ann. She doesn't care a damn. But, hizing up her petticoats, he crammed his mouth with fry and munched and droned. The doorway was darkened by an entering form. "The milk, sir." "Come in, ma'am," Mulligan said. "Kinch, get the jug." An old woman came forward and stood by Stephen's elbow. "That's a lovely morning, sir," she said. "Glory be to God." "To whom?" Mulligan said, glancing at her. "Ah, to be sure." Stephen reached back and took the milk jug from the locker. "The islanders," Mulligan said to Haines casually, "speak frequently of the collector of pre-pieces." "How much, sir?" asked the old woman. "A quart," Stephen said. He watched her pour into the measure and thence into the jug rich white milk, not hers. Old shrunken paps. She poured again a measureful and until it. Old in secret she had entered from the morning world, maybe a messenger. She praised the goodness of the milk, pouring it out, crouching by a patient cow at daybreak in the lush field, a witch on her toadstool, her wrinkled fingers quick at the squirting dugs. The load about her whom they knew, silky cattle. Silky the kin and poor old woman, names given her in old times. A wandering crone, lowly form of an immortal serving her conqueror and her gay betrayer, their common Clisquin, a messenger from the secret morning. To serve or to upbraid, whether he could not tell, but scorned to beg her favor. "It is indeed, ma'am," Buck Mulligan said, pouring milk into their cups. "Taste it, sir," she said. He drank at her bidding. "If we could live on good food like that," he said to her somewhat loudly, "we wouldn't have the country full of rotten teeth and rotten guts. Living in a bog swamp, eating cheap food in the streets paved with dust, horse dung and consumptive spits." "Are you a medical student, sir?" the old woman asked. "I am, ma'am," Buck Mulligan answered. "Look at them now," she said. Stephen listened in scornful silence. She bows her old head to a voice that speaks to her loudly, her bone setter, her meta-sentiment, may she slides. To the voice that will shrive in oil for the grave all theirs of her but her woman's unclean loins, a man's flesh made not in God's likeness, the serpent's prey. And to the loud voice that now bids her be silent with wandering unsteady eyes. "Do you understand what he says?" Stephen asked her. "Is it French you are talking, sir?" the old woman said to Haines. Haines spoke to her again a longer speech, confidently. "Irish," Buck Mulligan said. "Is there Gaelic on you?" "I thought it was Irish," she said, "by the sound of it." "Are you from the West, sir?" "I am an Englishman," Haines answered. "He's English," Buck Mulligan said, "and he thinks we ought to speak Irish in Ireland." "Sure we ought to," the old woman said, "and I'm ashamed I don't speak the language myself. I'm told it's a grand language by them that knows." "Grand isn't a name for it," said Buck Mulligan. "Wonderful entirely. Fill us out some more tea, Kinch." "Would you like a cup, ma'am?" "No, thank you, sir," the old woman said, slipping the ring of the milk in on her forearm and about to go. Haines said to her, "Have you your bill?" "We had better pay her, Mulligan, hadn't we?" Stephen filled again the 3 cups. "Bill, sir," she said, halting. "Well, it's 7 mornings a pint at 2pence is 7 twos a shilling and 2pence over in these 3 mornings a quart at 4pence is 3 quarts is a shilling. That's a shilling and 1 and 2 is 2 and 2, sir." Buck Mulligan sighed and, having filled his mouth with a crust thickly buttered on both sides, stretched forth his legs and began to search his trouser pockets. "Pay up and look pleasant," Haines said to him, smiling. Stephen filled a third cup, a spoonful of tea coloring faintly the thick rich milk. Buck Mulligan brought up a florin, twisted it round in his fingers and cried, "A miracle." He passed it along the table towards the old woman, saying, "Ask nothing more of me, sweet. All I can give you I give." Stephen laid the coin in her eager hand. "We'll owe tuppence," he said. "Time enough, sir," she said, taking the coin. "Time enough. Good morning, sir." She curtsied and went out, followed by Buck Mulligan's tender chant, "Heart of my heart, were it more would be laid at your feet." He turned to Stephen and said, seriously, "Ulysses, I'm stony. Hurry out to your school kip and bring us back some money. Today the bards must drink and junket. Ireland expects that every man this day will do his duty." "That reminds me," Haines said, rising, "that I have to visit your National Library today." "Or swim first," Buck Mulligan said. He turned to Stephen and asked blandly, "Is this the day for your monthly wash, Kinch?" Then he said to Haines, "The unclean bard makes a point of washing once a month." "All Ireland is washed by the Gulf Stream," Stephen said as he let honey trickle over a slice of the loaf. Haines, from the corner where he was knotting easily a scarf about the loose collar of his tennis shirt, spoke, "I intend to make a collection of your sayings if you will let me." Speaking to me. They wash and tub and scrub. Agent with the Vinwick. Conscience. Yet here's a spot. That one about the cracked looking glass of a servant being the symbol of Irish art is deuced good. Buck Mulligan kicked Stephen's foot under the table and said with warmth of tone, "Wait till you hear him on Hamlet, Haines." "Well, I mean it," Haines said, still speaking to Stephen. "I was just thinking of it when that poor old creature came in. Would I make any money by it?" Stephen asked. Haines laughed and, as he took his soft gray hat from the holdfast of the hammock, said, "I don't know, I'm sure." He strolled out to the doorway. Buck Mulligan bent across to Stephen and said with coarse vigor, "You put your hoof in it now. What did you say that for?" "Well," Stephen said, "the problem is to get money." "From whom? From the milkwoman or from him?" "It's a toss-up, I think." "I blow him out about you," Buck Mulligan said, "and then you come along with your lousy leer and your gloomy Jesuit jibes." "I see little hope," Stephen said, "from her or from him." Buck Mulligan sighed tragically and laid his hand on Stephen's arm. "From me, Kinch," he said. In a suddenly changed tone he added, "To tell you the God's truth, I think you're right. Damn all else they are good for. Why don't you play them as I do? To hell with them all. Let us get out of the kip." He stood up, gravely ungirdled and derobed himself of his gown, saying resignedly, "Mulligan is stripped of his garments." He emptied his pockets onto the table. "There's your snow trag," he said. And putting on his stiff collar and rebellious tie he spoke to them, chiding them, into his dangling watch chain. His hands plunged and rummaged in his trunk while he called for a clean handkerchief. "God, we'll simply have to dress the character. I want puce gloves and green boots." Contradiction. Do I contradict myself? Very well then, I contradict myself. Mercurial Malachi. A limp black missile flew out of his talking hands. "And there was your Latin quarter hat," he said. Stephen picked it up and put it on. Haynes called to them from the doorway, "Are you coming, you fellows?" "I'm ready," Buck Mulligan answered, going towards the door. "Come out, Kinch. You have eaten all we left, I suppose." Resigned, he passed out with grave words and gait, saying, "Will me with sorrow," and going forth he met Butterly. Stephen, taking his splant from its leaning place, followed them out and, as they went down the ladder, pulled to the slow iron door and locked it. He put the huge key in his inner pocket. At the foot of the ladder Buck Mulligan asked, "Did you bring the key?" "I have it," Stephen said, preceding them. He walked on. Behind him he heard Buck Mulligan club with his heavy bath all the leader shoots of ferns or grasses. "Down, sir." "How dare you, sir?" Haynes asked. "Do you pay rent for this tower?" "12 quid, Buck Mulligan said. "To the Secretary of State for War," Stephen added over his shoulder. They halted while Haynes surveyed the tower and said at last, "Rather bleak in winter time, I should say." "Martello you call it?" "Billy Pate had them built," Buck Mulligan said, "when the French were on the sea. Put ours as the young fellows." "What is your idea of Hamlet?" Haynes asked Stephen. No, Buck Mulligan shouted in pain. "I'm not equal to Thomas Aquinas and the 55 reasons he has made out to prop it up. Wait till I have a few pints in me first." He turned to Stephen, saying, as he pulled down neatly the peaks of his primrose waistcoat, "You couldn't manage it under 3 pints, Kinch, could you?" "It has waited so long," Stephen said listlessly, "it can wait longer." "You pique my curiosity," Haynes said amiably. "Is it some paradox?" "Pooh," Buck Mulligan said. "We have grown out of wild and paradoxes. It's quite simple. He proves by algebra that Hamlet's grandson is Shakespeare's grandfather and that he himself is the ghost of his own father." "What?" Haynes said, beginning to point at Stephen. "He himself." Buck Mulligan slung his towel stowawise round his neck and, bending in loose laughter, said to Stephen's ear, "Oh, shade of Kinch the elder. Japhet in search of a father." "We're always tired in the morning," Stephen said to Haynes. "And it is rather long to tell." Buck Mulligan, walking forward again, raised his hands. "The sacred pint alone can unbind the tongue of Daedalus," he said. "I mean to say," Haynes explained to Stephen as they followed, "this tower and these cliffs here remind me somehow of Elsinore. That beetles over his base into the sea, isn't it?" Buck Mulligan turned suddenly for an instant towards Stephen but did not speak. In the bright silent instant Stephen saw his own image in cheap dusty mourning between their gay attires. "It's a wonderful tale," Haynes said, bringing them to halt again. Eyes, pale as the sea the wind had freshened, paler, firm and prudent. The sea's ruler, he gazed southward over the bay, empty save for the smoky plume of the mailboat vague on the bright skyline and a sail tacking by the Muglins. "I read a theological interpretation of it somewhere," he said bemused. "The Father and the Son idea. The Son striving to be atoned with the Father." Buck Mulligan at once put on a blithe, broadly smiling face. He looked at them, his well-shaped mouth open happily, his eyes, from which he had suddenly withdrawn all shrewd sense, blinking with mad gaiety. He moved a doll's head to and fro, the brims of his Panama hat quivering, and began to chant in a quite happy, foolish voice, "I'm the queerest young fellow that ever you heard. My mother's a Jew, my father's a bird. With Joseph the joiner I cannot agree. So here's the disciples in Calvary. He held up a forefinger in warning. If anyone thinks that I am single quote T divine, he'll get no free drinks when I'm making the wine, but have to drink water in which it were plain that I make when the wine becomes water again. He tugged swiftly at Stephen's plan in farewell and, running forward to a brow of the cliff, fluttered his hands at his sides like fins or wings of one about to rise in the air, and chanted, "Goodbye, now, goodbye." Write down all I said, and tell Tom, Dick and Harry I rose from the dead. What's bred in the bone cannot fail me to fly, and I'll leave what's breezy. Goodbye, now, goodbye. He capered before them down towards the 40-foot hole, fluttering his wing-like hands, leaping nimbly, Mercury's hat quivering in the fresh wind that bore back to them his brief bird's weak cries. Haynes, who had been laughing guardedly, walked on beside Stephen and said, "We oughtn't to laugh, I suppose. He's rather blasphemous. I'm not a believer myself, that is to say. Still his gaiety takes the harm out of it somehow, doesn't it? What did he call it? Joseph the Joiner." "The ballad of joking Jesus," Stephen answered. "Oh," Haynes said, "you have heard it before." 3 times a day, after meals, Stephen said drearily. "You not a believer, are ye?" Haynes asked. "I mean, a believer in the narrowest sense of the word. Creation from nothing and miracles in a personal God." "There's only one sense of the word, it seems to me," Stephen said. Haynes stopped to take out a smooth silver case in which twinkled a green stone. He sprang it open with his thumb and offered it. "Thank you," Stephen said, taking a cigarette. Haynes helped himself and snapped the case to. He put it back in his side pocket and took from his waistcoat pocket a nickel tinder box, sprang it open too, and, having lit his cigarette, held the flaming sponge towards Stephen in the shell of his hands. "Yes, of course," he said, as they went on again. "Either you believe or you don't, isn't it? Personally, I couldn't stomach that idea of a personal God. You don't stand for that, I suppose." "You behold in me," Stephen said with grim displeasure, "a horrible example of free thought." He walked on, waiting to be spoken to, trailing his plant by his side. Its Thurul followed lightly on the path, squealing at his heels. My familiar, after me, calling, "Stephen." The wavering line along the path. They will walk on it tonight, coming here in the dark. He wants that key. It is mine. I pay the rent. Now I eat his salt bread. Give him the key too. All. He will ask for it. That was in his eyes. After all, Haynes began. Stephen turned and saw that the cold gaze which had measured him was not all unkind. "After all, I should think you are able to free yourself. You are your own master, it seems to me." "I am a servant of 2 masters," Stephen said, "in English and in Italian." "Italian," Haynes said. "A crazy queen, old and jealous. Kneel down before me." In a third, Stephen said, "There's who wants him for odd jobs." "Italian," Haynes said again. "What do you mean?" "The Imperial British State," Stephen answered, his color rising, "and the Holy Roman Catholic and Apostolic Church." Haynes detached from his underlip some fibers of tobacco before he spoke. "I can quite understand that," he said calmly. "An Irishman must think like that, I dare say. We feel in England that we have treated you rather unfairly. It seems history is to blame. The proud potent titles clanged over Stephen's memory, the triumph of their brazen bells, Etiam Sanctam Catholicum et Apostolicum Ecclesiam, the slow growth and change of writing dogma like his own rare thoughts, a chemistry of stars. Symbol of the apostles in the Mass for Pope Marcellus, the voices blended, singing alone loud in affirmation, and behind their chant the vigilant angel of the church militant disarmed and menaced her heresiarchs. A horde of heresies fleeing with mitres awry, Photius and the brood of mockers of whom Mulligan was one, and Arius, warring his life long upon the consubstantiality of the Son with the Father, and Valentine, spurning Christ's Terrian body, and the subtle African heresiarch Sabellius who held that the Father was himself his own Son. Words Mulligan had spoken a moment since in mockery to the stranger. Idle mockery. The void awaits surely all them that weave the wind, a menace, a disarming and a worsting from those embattled angels of the church, Michael's host, who defend her ever in the hour of conflict with their lances and their shields. Here. Prolonged applause. Zoot. Nom-de-doo. Of course I'm a Britisher, Haynes's voice said, and I feel as one. I don't want to see my country fall into the hands of German Jews either. That's our national problem, I'm afraid, just now. Two men stood at the verge of the cliff, watching, businessman, boatman. She's making for Bullock Harbor. The boatman nodded towards the north of the bay with some disdain. There's 5 fathoms out there, he said. It'll be swept up that way when the tide comes in about 1. It's night and days today. The man that was drowned. A sail veering about the blank bay waiting for swollen bundle to bob up, roll over to the sun a puffy face, salt white. Here I am. They followed the winding path down to the creek. Buck Mulligan stood on a stone, in shirt sleeves, his unclipped tie rippling over his shoulder. A young man clinging to a spur of rock near him, moved slowly frog-wise, his green legs in the deep jelly of the water. Is the brother with you, Malachi? Down in Westmeath. With the Bannons. Still there. I got a card from Bannon. Says he found a sweet young thing down there. Photo girl he calls her. Snapshot, eh? Brief exposure. Buck Mulligan sat down to unlace his boots. An elderly man shot up near the spur of rock, a glowing red face. He scrambled up by the stones, water glistening on his paint and on its garland of gray hair, water rilling over his chest and paunch and spilling jets out of his black sagging loincloth. Buck Mulligan made way for him to scramble past and, glancing at Haynes and Stephen, crossed himself piously with his thumbnail at brow and lips and breastman. Seymour is back in town, the young man said, grasping again his spur of rock. Chucked medicine and going in for the army. Ah, go to God. Buck Mulligan said. Going over next week to Stu. You know that Red Carlisle girl, Billy? Yes. Spooning with him last night on the pier. The father's rode out with money. Is she up the pole? Better ask Seymour that. Seymour, a bleeding officer. Buck Mulligan said. He nodded to himself as he drew off his trousers and stood up, saying tritely, red-headed women buck like goats. He broke off in alarm, feeling his side under his flapping shirt. My 12th rib is gone, he cried. I'm the Übermensch. Toothless Kinch and I, the Superman. He struggled out of his shirt and flung it behind him to where his clothes lay. Are you going in here, Malachi? Yes. Make room in the bed. The young man shoved himself backward through the water and reached the middle of the creek on 2 long clean strokes. Haynes sat down on a stone, smoking. "Are you not coming in?" Buck Mulligan asked. "Later on," Haynes said. "Not on my breakfast." Stephen turned away. "I'm going, Mulligan," he said. "Give us that key, Kinch," Buck Mulligan said, "to keep my chemise flat." Stephen handed him the key. Buck Mulligan laid it across his heat clothes. "And tuppence," he said, "for a pie. Throw it there." Stephen threw 2 pennies on the soft heap. "Dressing, undressing." Buck Mulligan, erect, with joined hands before him, said solemnly, "He who stealeth from the pool lendeth to the Lord. Thus spake Zarathustra." His plump body plunged. "We'll see you again," Haynes said, turning as Stephen walked up the path and smiling at Wild Irish. "Horn of a bull, hoof of a horse, smile of a Saxon." "The ship," Buck Mulligan cried. 12:30. "Good," Stephen said. He walked along the upward curving path. Lelia Rudy Landium. Terminus circumdet. Eubalanium T virginum. The priest's grey nimbus in a niche where he dressed discreetly. "I will not sleep here tonight. Home also I cannot go." A voice, sweet and sustained, called to him from the sea. Turning the curve he waved his hand. It called again. A sleek brown head, the seals, far out on the water, round. "Usurper." Cochrane, what city sent for him?" "Tarentum, sir." "Very good." "Well?" "There was a battle, sir." "Very good." "Where?" The boy's blank face asked the blank window. Fabled by the daughters of memory. And yet it was in some way not as memory fabled it. A phrase, then, of impatience, thudded blank swings of excess. "I hear the ruin of all space, shattered glass and toppling masonry, and time one livid final flame. What's left us then?" "I forget the place, sir." 279 B.C. Asculum, Stephen said, glancing at the name and date in the Gorescard book. "Yes, sir." And he said, "Another victory like that and we're done for." That phrase a world had remembered. A dull ease of the mind. From the hill above a corpse's ruined plain, a general speaking to his officers, leaned upon his spear. Any general to any officers. They lent ear. Armstrong, Stephen said. "What was the end of Paris?" "End of Paris, sir." "I know, sir." "Ask me, sir," Clement said. "Wait." Armstrong. "Do you know anything about Paris?" The bag of Figaro's lay snugly in Armstrong's satchel. He curled them between his palms at whiles and swallowed them softly. Crumbs adhered to the tissue of his lips. A sweetened boy's breath. Well-off people, proud that their eldest son was in the Navy. Vico Road, Dalkey. "Paris, sir." "Paris, a pier." All laughed. Mirthless, high, malicious laughter. Armstrong looked round at his classmates, silly glee in profile. In a moment they will laugh more loudly, aware of my lack of rule and of the fees that papas pay. "Tell me now," Stephen said, poking the boy's shoulder with the book, "what is a pier?" "A pier, sir," Armstrong said. "A thing out in the water. A kind of a bridge." "Kingstown Pier, sir." Some laughed again, mirthless but with meaning. Two in the back bench whispered. Yes. They knew, had never learned nor ever been innocent. All. With envy he watched their faces, Edith, Ethel, Gertie, Lily. Their likes, their breaths, too, sweetened with tea and jam, their bracelets tittering in the struggle. Kingstown Pier, Stephen said. Yes, a disappointed bridge. The words troubled their gaze. How, sir? Kmin asked. The bridge is across a river. For Haynes's chapbook. No one here to hear. Tonight deftly amid wild drink and talk, to pierce the polished mail of his mind. What then? A gesture at the court of his master, indulged and disesteemed, winning the clement master's praise. Why had they chosen all that part? Not wholly for the smooth caress. For them too history was a tale like any other too often heard, their land a pawnshop. Had Piers not fallen by Beldam's hand and Argos or Julius Caesar not been knifed to death, they are not to be thought away. Time has branded them and fettered they are lodged in the room of the infinite possibilities they have ousted. But can those have been possible seeing that they never were? Or was the only possible which came to pass? Weaver of the wind. Tell us a story, sir. Oh, do, sir. A ghost story. Where do you begin in this? Stephen asked, opening another book. Weep no more, Kmin said. Go on then, Talbot. And the story, sir. After, Stephen said. Go on, Talbot. The swarthy boyo opened a book and propped it nimbly under the breastwork of his satchel. He recited jerks of verse with odd glances at the text. Weep no more, woeful shepherds, weep no more. Felicitas, your sorrow, is not dead, sunk though he be beneath the watery floor. It must be a movement then, an actuality of the possible as possible. Aristotle's phrase formed itself within the gabled verses and floated out into the studious silence of the library of St. Genevieve where he had read, sheltered from the sin of Paris, night by night. By his elbow a delicate Siamese Conde handbook of strategy. Fed and feeding brains about me, under glow lamps, impaled, with faintly beating fillers, and in my mind's darkness a sloth of the underworld, reluctant, shy of brightness, shifting her dragon scaly folds. Thought is the thought of thought. Tranquil brightness. The soul is in a manner all that is, the soul is the form of forms. Tranquility sudden, vast, condescent, form of forms. Talbot repeated, through the dear might of him that walked the waves, through the dear might. Turn over, Stephen said quietly. I don't see anything. What, sir? Talbot asked simply, bending forward. His hand turned the page over. He leaned back and went on again, having just remembered. Of him that walked the waves. Here also over these craven hearts his shadow lies, and on the scoffer's heart and lips and on mine. It lies upon their eager faces. He offered him a coin of the tribute. To Caesar what is Caesar's, to God what is God's. A long look from dark eyes, a riddling sentence to be woven and woven on the church's looms. Riddle me, Randy Rowe. My father gave me seeds to sow. Talbot slid his closed book into his satchel. Have I heard all? Stephen asked. Yes, sir. Hockey at 10, sir. Half day, sir. Thursday. Who can answer a riddle? Stephen asked. They bundled their books away, pencils clacking, pages rustling. Crowding together they strapped and buckled their satchels, all gabbling gaily. "A riddle, sir?" "Ask me, sir." "Oh, ask me, sir." "A hard one, sir." "This is the riddle," Stephen said. "The cock crew, the sky was blue, the bells in heaven were striking 11. 'Tis time for this poor soul to go to heaven." "What is that?" "What, sir?" "Again, sir." We didn't hear. Their eyes grew bigger as the lines were repeated. After silence, Cochrane said, "What is it, sir?" "We give it up." Stephen, his throat itching, answered, "The fox burying his grandmother under a lilac bush." He stood up and gave a shout of nervous laughter to which their cries echoed dismay. A stick struck the door and a voice in the corridor called, "Hockey." They broke asunder, sidling out of their benches, leaping them. Quickly they were gone, and from the lumber room came the rattle of sticks and clamor of their boots and tongues. Sergeant, who alone had lingered, came forward slowly, showing an open copybook. His thick hair and scraggy neck gave witness of unreadiness, and through his misty glasses weak eyes looked up pleading. On his cheek, dull and bloodless, a soft stain of ink lay, lady-shaped, recent and damp as a snail's bed. He held out his copybook. The word "Sums" was written on the headline. Beneath were sloping figures, and at the foot a crooked signature with blind loops and a blot. "Cyril Sargent," his name and seal. "Mr. Ulysses told me to write them out all again," he said, "and show them to you, sir." Stephen touched the edges of the book. Futility. "Do you understand how to do them now?" he asked. "Numbers 11 to 15, Sergeant answered. "Mr. Ulysses said I was to copy them off the board, sir." "Can you do them yourself?" Stephen asked. "No, sir." Ugly and futile, lean neck and thick hair and a stain of ink, a snail's bed. Yet someone had loved him, borne him in her arms and in her heart. But for her the race of the world would have trampled him underfoot, a squashed boneless snail. She had loved his weak watery blood drained from her own. Was that thing real? The only true thing in life? His mother's prostrate body, the fiery Columbanus and holy zeal bestrode. She was no more, the trembling skeleton of a twig burned in the fire, an odor of rosewood and wetted ashes. She had saved him from being trampled underfoot and had gone, scarcely having been. A poor soul gone to heaven, and on a heath beneath winking stars a fox, red reek of rapine in his fur, with merciless bright eyes scraped in the earth, listen, scraped up the earth, listen, scraped and scraped. Sitting at his side, Stephen solved out the problem. He proves by algebra that Shakespeare's ghost is Hamlet's grandfather. Sergeant peered askance through his slanted glasses. Hockey sticks rattled in the lumber room, the hollow knock of the ball and calls from the field. Across the page the symbols moved in gray mirrors, and the mummery of the letters, wearing quaint caps of squares and cubes. Give hands, Travers, bow to partner, so, imps of fancy of the moors. Gone too from the world, Ava Rose and Moses Maimonides, dark men and mean in movement, flashing in their mocking mirrors the obscure soul of the world, the darkness shining in brightness which brightness could not comprehend. Do you understand now? Can you work the second for yourself? Yes, sir. And long shaky stroke Sergeant copied the data. Waiting always for a word of help, his hand moved faithfully the unsteady symbols, a faint hue of shame flickering behind his dull skin. Amatrice, subjective and objective genitive. With her weak blood and whey sour milk she had fed him and hid from sight of others his swaddling bands. Like him was I, these sloping shoulders, this gracelessness. My childhood bent beside me. Too far for me to lay a hand there once or lightly. Mine as far in his secret as our eyes. Secrets, silent, stony sit in the dark palaces of both our hearts, secrets weary of their tyranny, tyrants, willing to be dethroned. The sum was done. It is very simple, Stephen said as he stood up. Yes, sir. Thanks, Sergeant answered. He dried the page with a sheet of thin blotting paper and carried his copybook bag to his bench. You had better get your stick and go out to the others, Stephen said as he followed towards the door of the boy's graceless form. Yes, sir. In the corridor his name was heard, called from the playfield. Sergeant. Run on, Stephen said. Mr. Ulysses is calling you. He stood in the porch and watched the laggard hurry towards the scrappy field where sharp voices were in strife. They were sorted in teams and Mr. Ulysses came away stepping over wisps of grass with gaitered feet. When he had reached the schoolhouse voices again contending called to him. He turned his angry white mustache. What is it now? He cried continually without listening. Cochrane and Halliday are on the same side, sir, Stephen said. Will you wait in my study for a moment, Mr. Ulysses said, till I restore order here. And as he stepped fussily back across the field his old man's voice cried sternly, What is the matter? What is it now? The sharp voices cried about him on all sides. Their many forms closed around him, the garish sunshine bleaching the honey of his ill-dyed head. Stale smoky air hung in the study with the smell of drabble braided leather of its chairs. As on the first day he bargained with me here. As it was in the beginning, is now. On the settee bar the tray of Stuart coins, base treasure of a bog, and ever shall be. And snug in their spoon case of purple plush, faded, the 12 apostles having preached to all their Gentiles, world without end. A hasty step over the stone porch and in the corridor. Blowing out his rare mustache Mr. Ulysses halted at the table. First, our little financial settlement, he said. He brought out of his coat a pocketbook bound by a leather thong. It slapped open and he took from the 2 notes, one of joined halves, and laid them carefully on the table. 2, he said, strapping and stowing his pocketbook away. And now his strong room for the gold. Stephen's embarrassed hand moved over the shells heaped in the cold stone mortar, whelks and money cowries and leopard shells, and this, Harold is an emir's turban, and this, the scallop of St. James. An old pilgrim's hoard, dead treasure, hollow shells. A sovereign fell, bright and new, on the soft pile of the tablecloth. 3, Mr. Ulysses said, turning his little savings box about in his hand. These are handy things to have. See. This is for sovereigns. This is for shillings. Sixpences, half-crowns. And here crowns. See. He shot from the 2 crowns and 2 shillings. 3.12, he said. I think you'll find this right. Thank you, sir, Stephen said, gathering the money together with shy haste and putting it all in the pocket of his trousers. No thanks at all, Mr. Ulysses said. You have earned it. Stephen's hand, free again, went back to the hollow shells. Symbols too of beauty and of power. A lump in my pocket, symbols soiled by greed and misery. Don single quote he carried like that, Mr. Ulysses said. You'll pull it out somewhere and lose it. You just buy one of these machines. You'll find them very handy. Answer something. Mine would be often empty, Stephen said. The same room and hour, the same wisdom, and now the same. 3 times now. 3 nooses round me here. Well, I can break them in this instant if I will. Because you don't save, Mr. Ulysses said, pointing his finger. You don't know yet what money is. Money is power. When you have lived as long as I have. I know. If youth but knew. But what does Shakespeare say? Put but money in thy purse. I'll go, Stephen murmured. He lifted his gaze from the idle shells to the old man's stare. He knew what money was, Mr. Ulysses said. He made money. A poet, yes, but an Englishman too. Do you know what is the pride of the English? Do you know what is the proudest word you will ever hear from an Englishman's mouth? The sea's ruler. His seagull eyes look on the empty bay. It seems history is to blame, on me and on my words, unhating. That on his empire, Stephen said, the sun never sets. But, Mr. Ulysses cried. That's not English. A French kilt said that. He tapped his savings box against his thumbnail. I will tell you, he said solemnly, what is his proudest boast. I paid my way. Good man, good man. I paid my way. I never borrowed a shilling in my life. Can you feel that? I owe nothing. Can you? Mulligan, £9, 3 pairs of socks, 1 pair of brogues, ties. Curran, 10 guineas. McCann, 1 guinea. Fred Ryan, 2 shillings. Temple, 2 lunches. Russell, 1 guinea. Cousins, 10 shillings. Bob Reynolds, half a guinea. Kohler, 3 guineas. Mrs. McKernan, 5 weeks' board. The lump I have is useless. For the moment, no, Stephen answered. Mr. Ulysses laughed with rich delight, putting back his savings box. I knew you couldn't, he said joyously. But one day you must feel it. We're a generous people, but we must also be I fear those big words, Stephen said, which make us so unhappy. Mr. Ulysses stared sternly for some moments over the mantelpiece at the shapely bulk of a man in tartan filly bags, Albert Edward, Prince of Wales. You think me an old fogey and an old Tory, his thoughtful voice said. I saw 3 generations since O'Connell's time. I remember the famine in single quote 46. Do you know that the Orange Lodges agitated for repeal of the Union 20 years before O'Connell did, or before the prelates of your communion denounced him as a demagogue? You Fenians forget some things. Glorious, pious and immortal memory. The Lodge of Diamond and Armagh, the splendid bell hung with corpses of Papicius. Horse, masked and armed, the Planters' Covenant. The Black North and True Blue Bible. Croppies lie down. Stephen sketched a brief gesture. I have rebel blood in me too, Mr. Ulysses said. On the spindle side. But I am descended from Sir John Blackwood, who voted for the Union. We are all Irish, all king's sons. Alas, Stephen said. Gravitas rectus, Mr. Ulysses said firmly, was his motto. He voted for it and put on his top boots to ride to Dublin from the yards and down to Dussault. Wow, the rocky road to Dublin. A gruff squire on horseback with shiny top boots. Soft day, Sir John. Soft day, your honor. Day. Two tall boats jogged dangling on to Dublin. Wow, they're all the roddy.